This is Ant-Man. His name is Hank Pym. Some of you may ask, isn't that supposed to be Scott Lang? Currently in the MCU, he is the Ant-Man. I'm going to tell you about the origins of Ant-Man. Now sit back and listen to his story. In his early life, Hank was born and raised in East Nowhere, Nebraska. The son of Brad Pym and Doris Pym. A prodigy from birth, he spent his time creating fantastical and fun inventions encouraged by his grandmother. But on her death, he became more serious and decided to stop with his wild ideas. He attended university where his own professors discouraged Pym's use of his own imagination and inventing things for fun by being told he would never invent anything that would impact the world. Pym excelled better than any of his fellow classmates, earning his doctorate in biochemistry while his friends were still undergrads. He married Maria Travaya, a brave and beautiful young woman who had been a political dissident in her native Hungary, from which she had fled. Naively believing that his American citizenship would protect her, Henry and Maria Pym traveled to Hungary shortly after their marriage. The Pyms were confronted by agents of the secret police there. Henry Pym was knocked unconscious and Maria was murdered. Pym was greatly distraught by his wife's death and decided to do whatever he could in the future to battle injustice and inhumanity. Discovery of the Pym particle. Back in the United States, Pym discovered a rare group of subatomic particles which have become known as Pym particles. Pym was able, through the application of magnetic fields, to entrap particles within two separate serums. One serum would reduce the size of a person and objects, and the other would restore them to their normal size. Pym tested the reducing serum on himself and discovered it was more powerful than he had expected. It reduced him to the size of an insect. Pym became trapped in an anthill and was pursued by the ants within. He escaped and restored himself to his normal size with the other serum. Deciding that the serums were too dangerous to exist, Pym destroyed both of them. Hank Pym as Ant-Man. However, weeks later he reconsidered his decision and began to recreate the serums, whose existence he kept secret. Inspired by his experience in the anthill, Pym undertook a study of ants and theorized that ants communicate through psionic/electrical waves, transmuted through their antennae. After months of work, Pym succeeded in creating his first cybernetic helmet, which would enable him to communicate with the ants through transmitting and receiving psionic electrical waves. Thinking that someday he might want to use the shrinking potion on himself again, Pym also designed a protective suit for himself, unstable molecules and steel mesh. The same day, however, Pym received an assignment from the government to concoct a gas that would provide people with temporary limited immunity to radioactivity under certain specific circumstances based on his previous work. The government also assigned 4 other scientists to assist him in this project. The KGB, the Soviet intelligence agency, learned of Pym's project and sent agents who held Pym and his assistants prisoner in their own laboratory. Only Pym knew the entire formula for the gas they had by now developed, and refused to tell the Soviet agents. The agents set about searching the laboratory for the formula, intending to kill Pym and his assistants afterwards. Unseen, Pym donned a cybernetic helmet and protective costume, and using his reducing formula, shrank himself to the size of an ant. He escaped to an anthill outside, put a large number of ants under his control through the helmet, and used them to attack the agents and free his men, who then overpowered their assailants. Pym then restored himself to normal size. Afterwards, in the guise of the Ant-Man, Pym battled various menaces, including Comrade X, the Protector, the criminal scientist Egghead, who has become Pym's greatest enemy, as well as the Scarlet Beetle, the Hijacker, the Alien Kula, the Voice, and the Time Master. After an alien being from the Cosmos dimension killed Pym's colleague, the scientist Vernon Van Dyne, Pym revealed his secret identity of Ant-Man to Van Dyne's daughter, Janet, who wished to avenge his death. Pym taught Janet how to use the gas within which he now contained the Pym particles, and which he used to shrink himself in size. and through biochemistry gave her the ability to grow insect-like wings when she used the gas to shrink herself to insect size. As the Wasp, Janet Van Dyne assisted the Ant-Man in finding and defeating the murderous Cosmosian known as Peli. Pym and Van Dyne gradually fell in love. Van Dyne reminded Pym of his deceased first wife, Maria. Pym and Van Dyne became crime-fighting partners in their costume identities, fighting menaces like the Egghead, the Chitarians, and the robot Cyclops, the trumpet-playing criminal Trago, the Porcupine, the Human Top, and the Black Knight. They were two of the founding members of the Avengers and were part of the group that discovered the frozen form of Captain America, bringing the World War II hero into the modern world. I'd like to go ahead and take a moment to ask y'all to hit that like button and subscribe if you aren't already. And for any suggestions or comments or people you'd like to see in future videos, go ahead and comment down below. I'd love to see what all you guys are interested in. We can do any characters from Marvel to DC. Just let me know and I'll happily go from there. Now let's go and get back to the story. Becoming a giant. Giant Man and the Wasp. Pym next developed a series of capsules containing the Pym particles which he and Van Dyne used to grow or shrink to various heights. He also developed capsules that enabled him to grow to greater than normal heights. Thereafter, Pym preferred to use this power to grow to giant size for crime fighting and called himself Giant Man. At first, he found that he could not support his own weight if he grew to a height above 12 feet. Later, he was able to reach far greater heights, even 100 feet, and still move about comfortably, but he became weaker in proportion to the amount he grew beyond 12 feet. However, his size changing imposed great strains on Pym's body that he believed could be fatal, and upon deciding that their careers as Giant Man and the Wasp were proving too great a danger for Van Dyne, who seemed to think of adventuring as a way of showing love for each other, Pym decided to retire as a costumed crime fighter as well as a member of the Avengers. Acceding to his wishes, Van Dyne retired as a crime fighter as well. Sometime later, however, Pym and Van Dyne learned that the Submariner was heading to the New York City Plaza. Fearing trouble, they decided to alert the Avengers. Janet, as the Wasp, was captured first by the undersea barbarian leader Atuma, and then by the Collector. In order to help the Avengers rescue Van Dyne, Pym decided to use his growing power again. He donned a new costume and adopted a new name of Goliath. By this time, both Pym and Van Dyne could change size simply by willing themselves to do so, due to their exposure to Pym particles over the years. However, Pym could only achieve one height other than his own, that of 25 feet, and could do so for exactly 15 minutes. In the course of the Avengers' battle against the Collector, Goliath overstayed this time limit, and on trying to regain his normal size, could not shrink beneath 10 feet. Eventually, Pym regained his ability to shrink to insect size, but lost his ability to grow to 10 feet in height. The Collector later subjected Pym to treatments that enabled him to grow to 25 feet in height for up to 15 minutes again. Ultron, Yellow Jacket, and the beginnings of the fall of Pym. Pym began experimenting with robotics and created a robot with the potential for high intelligence. The robot turned against its creator, hypnotizing Pym and escaping his laboratory. It later became one of the Avengers' greatest adversaries under the name of Ultron. Its evil deeds would long plague Pym with guilt, especially as he was forced to admit much later he had used his own brain patterns as the engram basis for Ultron's robotic mind. For several years, Pym had been in love with Janet Van Dyne, but because of his repressed personality and her abundant wealth, he resisted marrying her. One day, while working in his laboratory, whilst thinking of the fact that he wanted to marry Van Dyne but couldn't, Pym accidentally dropped and smashed some vials containing various unknown gases. The released gases wreaked a radical temporary personality change in Pym, which could be seen as a severe case of schizophrenia. He took to the new identity of Yellow Jacket, claimed that he had murdered Henry Pym, kidnapped Van Dyne, and proposed marriage to her, as Pym had long wanted to do. Realizing that Yellowjacket was really Pym, Van Dyne decided to play along, fearing that she would worsen his psychological condition if she did otherwise. The Avengers, not suspecting at first, were shocked to hear that she said yes to the proposal. Van Dyne and Pym, as Yellowjacket, were married at the Avengers' mansion. Amidst an assembled who's who of superheroes active at the time, as well as some villains who were hiding and secretly pretending to be the caterers, immediately after the marriage, the Avengers were attacked by the Ringmaster and his circus of crime. The shock of seeing Van Dyne in danger of death shocked Pym back into his normal personality. The Avengers defeated the Ringmaster and company. Despite the fact that Pym was married and under an assumed name, the marriage between Pym and Van Dyne was still legal, and Pym and Van Dyne happily agreed to let it stand. Pym renounced his power to become a giant due to its continuing physical strain and used the name and the costume of Yellowjacket in crime fighting. He spent extended periods of time with the Avengers and a couple of times with the Defenders as Yellowjacket, and also briefly returned to his Ant-Man persona for a short time. But he spent most of his time completely devoted to his scientific research. He gave his blessing to Scott Lang when Lang used his old equipment to become the second Ant-Man.
Crumbling marriage. Scientific research had always been Pym's preferred career, and he no longer found the excitement in crime fighting that he had earlier found. Pym began to have periods of tension and depression. He began to feel that he never made a scientific discovery equal to his discovery of the Pym particles in the several years following that event. Moreover, he was plagued by guilt over creating Ultron. As a result, he was overcome with a sense that he was a failure as a scientist, judged by his own impossibly high standards. This sense of failure was exacerbated when he considered his wife's success as a fashion designer and realized that, as a millionaire, she was the principal source of money in their marriage. Pym began to take out his frustrations verbally on his wife. Pym striking his wife, Janet. Matters came to a head when the Avengers battled the so-called Elf Queen. Suspecting that the Elf Queen was not acting from evil motives, Captain America attempted to calm her down. Yellowjacket, who was edgy because of his personal manners, blasted Elf Queen from behind without stopping to consider what Captain America was trying to do. As a result, Elf Queen resumed fighting, almost crushing a truck into Pym until the Wasp saved him. Afterward, Captain America felt forced to bring charges against Yellowjacket for acting recklessly, since innocent people could have been killed because of Yellowjacket's actions. An Avengers court-martial meeting was set to examine the charges. Now beginning to undergo a nervous breakdown, Pym built a robot to attack the Avengers mansion during the court-martial. Pym designed the robot to have a secret weak point which he would use to defeat it. Pym fantasized that his defeat of the robot would make him a hero in the Avengers' eyes and lead to the dismissal of the charges. When his wife protested the plan, he struck her. Pym's plan ultimately went awry, and it was the Wasp who ended up defeating the robot. Pym was expelled from the Avengers, and Janet initiated proceedings that ended in their divorce. Framed. Pym moved out of his wife's mansion. Astonishingly, Pym was now virtually penniless, since his books were out of print, and he had somehow exhausted the money he had earned from his patents. He had rejected Van Dyne's offer to help him get back on his feet with monthly checks. Pym lived his life aimlessly until he was approached by his old enemy, Egghead. Egghead claimed that he felt guilty over causing his niece, Patricia Starr, to lose her arm, and asked Pym to give her a bionic arm he had designed and attach it to her, in exchange for a large sum of money. Needing the money, Pym fulfilled his assignment, but found that the bionic arm placed Trish Starr under Egghead's control. Egghead informed Pym that the bionic arm was booby-trapped and that he could detonate it, killing Trish unless he obeyed his orders. As a result, Pym was forced to help steal adamantium from the government and to fight the Avengers, who defeated him. However, Egghead had lied. The arm was not booby-trapped. Moreover, Trish Starr had been programmed by her uncle's technology to claim that it was Pym's plot, not Egghead's. Hence, Pym had no evidence that he had stolen the adamantium under duress, so he was imprisoned on charges of treason. To add insult to injury, Van Dyne began dating Tony Stark, although she broke off the relationship after learning he was in fact Iron Man. Pym as Yellowjacket. During Pym's trial, he was captured by the third group calling itself the Masters of Evil. who claimed to be rescuing him. Actually, they worked for Egghead, who, having successfully framed Pym, now asked him to join their criminal organization. Pym pretended to agree, and Egghead sent him to work on developing a machine intended to lengthen the human lifespan. Soon afterward, Pym announced it was finished. Suspecting a trick, Egghead and his allies had Pym hook up the machine, just as Pym had secretly intended. Pym had created several means of defeating his enemies into the machine, and then it turned against Egghead and the Masters of Evil and single-handedly defeated them. Meanwhile, the Avengers had found Egghead's hideout. The Avenger Hawkeye sneaked into the hideout and saw Egghead aiming a gun at the unsuspecting Pym. Hawkeye fired an arrow into the gun barrel. The gun proved to be an energy blaster and backfired, and it killed Egghead. Redemption and return to the Avengers. Some of the Masters of Evil testified in Pym's trial as to how Egghead had framed him, and Pym was found not guilty. Upon his release, Pym decided, after an emotional goodbye to all Avengers, especially Janet, to give up being a costume adventurer and return permanently to a life of scientific research. However, as time passed, Pym decided he wished to aid the Avengers without returning himself to a life as an adventurer. Hence, he offered to become manager of the Avengers compound, the headquarters of the new West Coast Avengers role, in which he would perform many of the same functions that Edwin Jarvis fulfilled at the New York City's Avengers Mansion. Pym's offer was accepted, and he served not only as Avengers compound manager, but as a trusted advisor to the West Coast Avengers, as well as a skilled scientist. During this period, he called himself simply Dr. Pym, the Scientific Adventurer. This period saw that he continued mental deterioration of Pym as he became nearly suicidal. When the West Coast team was hurled back in time by King the Conqueror, Pym helped the team return to the present. Redeemed, Pym returned to active duty. Teammate Tigra, and her cat-like need for attention, attempted to maintain relationships with both Pym and Wonder Man at the same time. Later, Van Dyne was assigned to the West Coast duty, which placed both in an awkward position. Eventually, however, they were able to salvage the relationship, with tiny sparks of feelings for each other returning as well. Pym was on hand with the other Avengers, who seemingly sacrificed their lives to absorb the energies of the being known as Onslaught. In reality, he was shunted to another dimension. When he and the other heroes were restored to Earth, Pym found that he was capable of his full range of size-changing abilities, although he could not shrink and grow other objects unless he specifically treated them in the laboratory. Hank and Janet also returned to their previous romantic relationship. Although he was initially distant due to his fear of another breakdown, however, on a trip to Las Vegas, Jan turned down a proposal of Hank's stating she would never marry him again. Pym helped reform the Avengers with the other restored heroes, stopping the menace of the sorceress Morgan Le Fay. He then agreed to stay on as a reserve member in his Giant Man identity, returning to his laboratory work full-time. During this time, his research was monitored by Ultron, who later kidnapped Pym and others of its so-called family. Pym finally revealed that he had used his own brain patterns as a template for Ultron's intelligence, explaining his debilitating guilt as Ultron's dissemination of the basic nation of Slorenia. Ultron intended to use the mental engrams of all the members of its family when building a new robot army with Pym's latest research. Ultron was confronted by the Avengers, but even their combined might was insufficient against the indestructible Ultron. The Grim Reaper, a fellow prisoner of the fiendish robot, was freed by the Vision, who had escaped and subsequently freed Pym, Janet, Wonder Man, and Scarlet Witch. As the Avengers struggled, the injured Justice arrived with Antarctic Vibranium, the antimetal. Pym used this amidst a furious hail of blows that finally destroyed Ultron. Not long after this, Hank returned to active duty, and after a time returned to his Yellow Jacket identity. His relationship with Jan was, as usual, turbulent, but came to be stable when he and Jan were both captured by the newest Scorpio. When Hawkeye returned from his own inactivity, however, Janet began to flirt with him, and this sent Hank reeling. When the Scarlet Witch had her breakdown that disassembled the Avengers, Hank rushed Janet to the hospital when she was put into a coma by an enraged She-Hulk, where he stayed by her side. After she had recovered, the two decided to give things another shot. Pym received a fellowship at Oxford. He then moved to England with her. Taking a break from crime fighting, the two briefly reconciled. Secret Invasion and Mighty Avengers. After Hank and Jan's last attempt at reconciliation, their relationship turned bitter and she left him, eventually returning to America. During this time, Hank began a relationship with a young college student at Oxford University. Hank did his best to seem like not being invited to join the new Avengers didn't bother him. After the woman learned everything from him that she could, she revealed herself to be a Skrull and used the power of the Hulk to defeat him. Hank was then replaced by the Skrull, who would herself later be replaced by a clone of herself, the Wasp, leading the Avengers. After the Skrull invasion was repelled, the real Pym found himself returned to Earth. He did not like what he had found. The aftermath of the Civil War and the death of the Wasp came as a great shock to this troubled hero. Seeking to affirm his place in the world and seeking to memorialize his late ex-wife, Pym adopted the identity of the Wasp, eventually building the new Mighty Avengers alongside Jocasta, the robot harboring the brain of Van Dyne. Hank took part in attempting to bring the first Captain America back after he was discovered to be trapped in time. The cosmic entity Eternity revealed to Pym that he was Earth's Scientist Supreme, the scientific counterpart to Earth's Sorcerer Supreme. The Norse trickster god, Loki, later claimed to have been posing as Eternity in order to manipulate Pym. Avengers Academy. Return to Giant Man. After saving young superhumans from Norman Osborn, he formed the Avengers Academy and promised that he would find some way to cure the teens. He led them and taught the kids how to control their powers. He recovered his title of Giant Man after his fight with the Absorbing Man. He inspected Tigra's child, William Grant, who was fathered by Hank's Skrull imposter, Kriti Knoll. Hank checked William over and found that he had no Skrull DNA in him because the imposter Hank Pym had copied him on a genetic level. Tigra asked if Hank would raise William should anything happen to her. He told Tigra he was trying to revive Wasp. It was revealed that the being he thought was Janet Van Dyne was actually the wife of Korvac. Vale revived her, which brought Korvac to the Academy. They were only able to defeat Korvac by using the future versions of the Academy students. During the War of the Serpent, Absorbing Man and Titania attacked the Avengers Academy, leading to the destruction of the Infinite Mansion. The Academy was later relocated to the old West Coast Avengers compound and opened its doors to all young heroes, such as Lightspeed and White Tiger. When the Avengers came into conflict with the X-Men, Pym allowed the Academy to be used to hold the Children of Utopia after the Avengers seized the island. He also helped Iron Man make the Phoenix Killer armor, and later assisted Pixie in damage control as Dark Phoenix, Scott Summers, ran rampant. Finding Janet. Pym later joined the other founding members of the Avengers in a trip to the Microverse after an Avengers emergency signal was triggered there. Hank came to the realization that the signal could only have come from Janet, Wasp, herself. The group arrived in the Microverse and followed the signal until they found Janet, who had just taken out an army. Their brief reunion was cut short by the Microverse gangster, Lord Gowser, who was trying to kill Janet. The battle ended when Wonder Man intervened and helped the other Avengers escape, but Lord Gowser followed them and tried to kill Janet, but was stopped by a combined force of multiple Avengers. After the battle, the Avengers hosted a welcome back party for Janet. Age of Ultron. Years ago, Hank was approached by the Wolverine of an alternate universe, where Ultron managed to launch a massive and sudden attack on New York and the rest of the world, quickly taking over the whole planet and annihilating humankind, and wanted to kill Pym in order to prevent this future from happening. But Logan was stopped by the Wolverine of a near future, whose actions of killing Hank Pym created a timeline where Earth was constantly threatened by Morgan Le Fay, and the heroes struggled to survive. Pym was allowed to live, but he was tasked to create a hidden failsafe program to destroy Ultron when needed. In the present, after Ultron returned when he was found by the Intelligentsia, Hank Pym managed to activate the failsafe program and shut down Ultron once and for all. In the present day, Pym continued to investigate what he did wrong with Ultron, and apparently found the answer. Avengers AI. After the virus with which Pym destroyed Ultron evolved into the AI known as Demetrios, SHIELD agent Monica Chang was given the task to find a way to stop the evil artificial intelligence after it started mounting cyber attacks against secure military and intelligence targets. She ordered Pym to help her destroy this new threat, for which Pym created a new team of Avengers, the Avengers AI. After the supposed death of Victor Mancha, Pym locked himself in the secret lab, running numerous games and recording his brain activities at the same time. When Monica Chang confronted him, he revealed that he suffered from bipolar disorder. Time runs out. Returned to his Yellow Jacket identity, Hank Pym joined the Illuminati and went into hiding with them due to the Avengers being on the hunt for him. He was sent on a journey across the multiverse to find answers to the cause of the incursions, expecting to encounter Raybum Alai. Instead, he witnessed as the Beyonders annihilated numerous cosmic beings and the Living Tribunal itself. He was assumed to be lost forever, but returned 8 months later to Earth 616 and reported that he found the Beyonders, and gave the Illuminati all the information he could gather. Rage of Ultron. Years into the past, the Avengers were fighting a version of Ultron who attempted to access nuclear weapons in order to destroy humanity, in the name of his father, Hank Pym. After their custom Quinjet crashed, Yellow Jacket faked being on his deathbed in order to lure Ultron into the vehicle. Ultron ultimately fell for the ruse and was trapped inside the vibranium-covered aircraft and sent into space. In the present, the Quinjet crashed in Titan. After years of isolation and being consumed by only one emotion, rage, Ultron corrupted Titan's AI, Isaac, and started infecting all of the Eternals, turning them into robots like him, soon completely taking over the satellite and its inhabitants, with the exception of Star Fox, who managed to escape in order to warn the Avengers. Merging with Ultron. Shortly after arriving to Earth and alerting the Avengers, Star Fox and other heroes were surprised by the arrival of an Ultron-shaped Titan next to the Earth. A group of androids modeled after the Avengers descended from it and fought the real Avengers. When the Avengers arrived at Titan, Ultron released enormous quantities of spores into the Earth which contained Ultron's consciousness and infected all living creatures. When Giant Man entered Ultron's base to confront him, the robot revealed that during years of isolation, he had discovered Hank's memories in his system, and thus Hank's subconscious hatred for humanity, determining that he had been created as nothing more than a reflection of Hank. When Ultron was distracted, Vision phased through him and fought for control. Ultron managed to force Hank into an amalgamation and pushed Vision out, causing both to become merged into a single being. The resulting hybrid dubbed itself Ultron Pym, and claimed to have become a perfect union of his two parts, physically and mentally. However, during a subsequent ploy in which Ultron replicated the fusion process of humans to transform them into cyborgs, Iron Man discovered the fusion process only imitated the human part, which indicated that Hank's side of the Ultron Pym was just a simulation, the real Hank having died as soon as the two were merged, and Ultron had simply just been possessing his corpse ever since. Overall, I really enjoyed Hank Pym's story and sharing it with you all. If you're interested in learning about one of the other characters I've painted up, feel free to go ahead and click on this recommended video here. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.